Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to my webinar about the First Time Management Mentoring Program. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much and for tuning in such numbers. Kelly, Gary, lovely to see you. Let me know when you're from. Sunny Dorset is definitely a place to be. Phoenix, what's the weather like in Phoenix? It's quite decent in London, so that's fine. Finally, we're getting some warmer days, aren't we? All right, so today's webinar is not a workshop. Don't worry, it's a LinkedIn Live. Don't worry about breakout rooms. There are none to be found over here. Don't worry about, people asking you to come on camera. Just sit back, enjoy. But I'd also welcome your contributions in the chat. Let me know where you're from. Let me know what the weather's like. And let me know what you're feeling excited about. And to get you started, as always, I wanted to ask you a bit of a question, which is what's the best advice that you've ever received from a mentor? Assuming that, you had one, assuming that maybe someone wasn't formally named a mentor, but they still were. What was the best advice that you've got? Let me know, share it in the chat. I'd love to get your answers and we can get cracking. By the way, in terms of getting cracking, there's some important announcement I need to make, which is I'll be using humor. Yes, LinkedIn humor, dad jokes, cringe, all that, Polish accent. I don't know if you can take it, but we'll try to figure it out. Natalie, Alzel, Pamela, thank you so much for joining. And it's so lovely to see you here. So, that out of the way, hopefully, if you don't mind humor, you're still staying, so glad to see you here. Let's move on to what we'll be talking about today. Today, what I'm going to give you, hopefully you'll enjoy it, is I'll share my 4 biggest tips, or the tips that I believe are the most effective for building mentoring programs for your first-time managers. We'll talk about, how they work, what are the anti-patterns, and hopefully you'll be able to take them and use them in your organization effectively. So there you go. But before we go there, there's a bit of a tradition, which is I'm usually starting with a personal story. So sit back, enjoy the ride, enjoy the bit of a fireside chat. Let me just quickly change things over here and I'll get us started. Yes, a story about my mentor. I interestingly didn't have many mentors in my life, but 2025 has been abandoned. And I would like to talk about one of them. You might be surprised that one of my mentors is a retired US Air Force general. I mean, it's a bit wild. If you look at me, a management trainer and a leadership coach, why such a mentor? And yet, I won't name them, they're an amazing person, now a senior consultant, and they're an absolutely masterful mentor, and I learned so much from them. One thing that I found was a new thing that I've learned, and I've actually included it in my tips, which is how proactive he is. At one point, earlier in the year, I was maybe wobbling a bit about one of my strategic ideas and so on. And he immediately caught on into it and asked me if we should have a call. I think this kind of a proactiveness can only come from a very seasoned mentor. So, in terms of about you and your mentors, you might remember I've asked you some questions before the webinar itself. So as always, if you think about, back to your first mentor, what did they help you with the most, right? What was it that you had help about, and what is it that, was great? So essentially, thank you so much for all your answers. I had more than 150. So it's important for a mentor, as I think someone mentioned in the chat, to help you, not put you back down, not carry your own weight. And I think help is the most prevalent word in the word cloud. Thank you so much for your great answers. They really uplifted me. They really So many of you had great mentors. It's a challenge that I, only had mentors so late in my life. But what I love about these words is support, help, but also challenging, which is great. Susan has a great advice, where you need to be there. The mentors can be anywhere, and a mentor can be not only for work, but today we're talking about first-time managers. So let's go. But before we go, I'd like to introduce myself. So I'm TK. Hello. You probably know me by now if you're in this webinar, and thank you so much for so many of you tuning in. I'm a management trainer and leadership coach, and I work with senior leaders, helping them improve their organizations, especially around retention, engagement, and performance management. And I use various training and coaching techniques. So that's me, Polish accents, plenty of lights, and cringy humor. But what I would love to know is, who are you, right? So let me know by typing in the chat. It's quite simple, actually. I'll make it bigger. If you are an A, an L&D or an HR person, put an A in the chat. If you are in technology, put B. If you are a leader, put C in. And if you're just, a person that doesn't find themselves in any of these categories, feel free to put a D, which is fine, right? So feel free to put in a combination of these letters, which is great. Yeah, Lisa, great comment about, how a mentor challenged you to step out of the comfort zone. Thank you so much for adding it in. That's so great. Oh, thank you so much for so many great letters. Agnieszka, lovely to see you. Oh man, that's a busy chat, isn't it? So, all right. So I hope I'll be able to provide the value that you're looking for and meet my promises, wouldn't I? So let's go to, why should you actually care? Why is it important to invest and create mentoring programs for your first-time managers? Again, Diane, great advice. Thank you. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's one of the things. But the question is why? Why is it so important? Well, I've gathered some data. And when you think about it, there's plenty of challenges that happen when managers aren't performing at their best. First of all, like McKinsey says, managers are 2 times more important, 2 times more likely to stay over 5 years if they're being mentored. There's proper research around that. Lots of money is being lost, or lots of resources and performance is left on the table if management isn't great. If you look at the CMI Management Manifesto, you will see how management can help alleviate that. In the UK, it's estimated to be 84 billion a year. Huge thing. And 49% of employees have been quitting over a bad boss. If you look at Total Jobs and their research, it's something that, I'm sure many of you can relate to. So you can tell me, what is it that you came here for? What is it that you're expecting, and why you think these programs are important? Because I'm going to give you some tips. Some of you might be here to actually possibly get a project plan. It's interesting. As a recovering project manager, I found that quite strange to go in and do a Gantt chart, even for this example. But I'm not necessarily going to talk about that, because the challenge with these things is, as great as they are, they're quite basic. And I'm sure, many of you know how to set up a program, and they can get quite complex, right? You can have a situation when they really expand. You're talking to stakeholders, you're making sure you have sponsors. Every organization is different. And if I am to cover everything, it will just turn into a bit of a monster, I think. That's a representation of a complexity monster. Hopefully it's not too scary. It didn't break any generative AI. It didn't violate any guidance, so at least I was safe with that. But the thing is, today I want to keep it simple. I'll keep it simple for you, and I will just focus on the main 4 points of advice, because I think that can be effective. For me, it's all about making sure that the simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So let's start. Before I go into my first one, I would like to ask you another thought-provoking question. You gave me some great answers before. Now it's time to talk about, how long should a mentoring relationship last? If you think about it, what's the right amount of time that you should be spending with your mentee or with your mentor if you're in this situation? I'm wondering, what you think, and give me your answers in the chat. As always, I'm keen to hear. But as we, as always, have a delay in the LinkedIn Lives, I'll give you my answer, which is, does it need to end? I mean, I'll tell you a story. I've been a part of an organization called Toastmasters, years and years ago, and they had a mentoring scheme. And I became a mentor for some people, but I also had a mentor myself, and I've observed other mentors work. And one of the senior members of this organization, someone very experienced, basically told me that you have a mentor for life. Even though, there was a small difference in the perspective of like a decade that they've been a part of this organization, the mentor was like a year longer in this place compared to the mentee. Yet, they always called them a mentor. The important thing, and this is what I've learned, is these relationships stay. I hope that I'll be able to continue my relationship with the wonderful Air Force General that I talked about, but it's quite great. And there you go, right? There's a great comment about how often people should meet, so we'll talk about it later on. So I won't spoil it for you. Thank you so much. But for me, a mentoring relationship doesn't need to end. There you go, Akil, life. So we both probably have mentor for lives. Hopefully, we'll be able to find them. People that can stay with us, and if we're the mentors, we should do just that. So, my first tip is, you might remember, I've shown you a Gantt chart of a project. Now, I don't think a mentoring program should be a project. I think, and Tipo, thank you for your great comment in terms of, as long as the value is provided for both sides. That's also a thing, right? If the value isn't there, why would you continue the relationship? But I believe the program should be ongoing. You see, many organizations, what they do is they like spin up an annual project or a program with a Gantt chart, like I've shown you, to get a mentoring started for first-time managers. Now, the challenge is, if you do that, you obviously have a start and maybe a midpoint review and a completion. I, however, believe in a life cycle approach. The approach that mentoring, as long as the organization grows, as long as the organization delivers value, there will always be new first-time managers. So that's, I think, quite a big commitment to grow them. I think it's not enough to like start a program on a yearly basis. I believe as my first tip is to make the program ongoing. I'll give you some other tips as to how to make it happen. But then again, a great example would be, and I think this opens up new opportunities, which is how mentees can become mentors, right? This life cycle represents the fact that instead of just like doing an addition, you constantly evolve the program as it goes. And it also, I'll talk about a case study, helps with intake because no one feels like they've lost out. Alisa, thank you so much for your comment. And ongoing is probably something that you agree with too. So cheers. The next question for you, before I go to my next tip. I believe in mentors actually volunteering. Now, I'll talk about how to appoint them, but in a moment. But I would like you to think, why do you believe that people volunteer to be mentors? What is it about this role that makes it so that people pick it up and volunteer their time to help others in the organization? That people take their time to maybe help you when you think about, your early mentors or your current mentor. Now that I think about it, why is it that the mentor I talked about finds the time for me, as busy as they are. Let me know in the chat. And as you do, I'll give you my opinion as to what I see people having the reason about becoming a mentor. So the main reason, I believe, is to show themselves that they want to be helpful. Right? It's so important. Many people have this natural instinct to help others. And there's very little that we can do as human beings to feel valuable other than to help others. Right? The gratitude we're getting, the ability to change someone's life is a huge motivation. And I think my second tip is when appointing or calling for managers, have something so they can discover the reason why they're becoming or being a part of the program. It's important that they discover their why, which is my second tip. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I think, Victoria, thank you so much for talking about the fact that mentors are likely to share their experience, which is another reason, because many people like to talk about their own experiences and like to be listened. But that's my point. It's important that mentors join the program for the right reasons. Everyone's can be different. To be honest, I often see the mentoring program to be some kind of a special club, right? Oh, you want to be there. It's fashionable to be there. You will get a special badge as a mentor. It might not be the great reason why. Many people, and I think, Victoria, you've talked about that, want to share their experience, or I don't know if that's probably it's not the same, but many people like to have someone to listen to them, or as many people, unfortunately, are looking for someone to do some extra work for them because they're too busy. These aren't great reasons to become a mentor. It's important if you are, for instance, in the mentoring program team, it's just the fact that you help them discover the real reason why it is so. And it's okay if they have the reason that is not necessarily congruent with being in the program. They probably will elect not to join. But providing this opportunity for reflection, I think, is absolutely key. For instance, when I work with clients, organizing and starting these programs is making sure to actually get some mentors. So a practical tip here is if you actually help people discover the why, what you will share, and Akhil, thank you so much, that, for instance, they like to give back, they will be motivated to join. In my personal experience, when you're starting something up, and I'll talk about the case study later on, you can start by asking people to serve. You can start by asking people, okay, maybe you want to become a mentor, you want to become a mentor, and after a while, open it up for volunteers. It will gradually snowball because, as always, you have to manage the quantity of mentors and mentees, so that's a bit balanced. But I'm sure that I can see a lot of chat messages, which is great. I thank you so much for keeping the conversation going. I'm sure you have some great experiences there. But my tip is to help to get the right mentors, the people that are really into helping, the people that want to serve, help them discover their why. So it's my second tip of the 4. You might be wondering, what's the third one? Well, before I talk about it, I want to ask you another thought-provoking question. What do you think, for becoming a mentor, what should someone learn? What's important to learn for a mentor to be effective at what they do? I'll give you a moment to put your answers in the chat, but you probably can see by the variety of chat messages, and Distra, thank you so much, empowering others to reach their full potential, definitely what a mentor is all about, but what is it within themselves, right, as a mentor that makes them do that? What's the why for them? Right, so as always, as I'm getting your answers in the chat, I'll share mine, which is, I believe, the most important thing a mentor needs to learn about is themselves. Look, as any consultant coach, a mentor is a role that's there to help people. I think, going back to my previous advice about discovering their why, so many conversations happen through a lens of the mentor's perspective. I think the example I gave you about my mentor is, well, he's from a very different profession than I am. And yet, it's not a problem for a master mentor because he knows himself quite well. They're very comfortable with their skills. They're very comfortable with what they know, what they do not know, and they can easily talk about that. Michelle, active listening is also key, but to be able to actively listen, you probably want to know yourself enough to stop talking. Well, coming from a person that talks to you for 45 minutes, it is quite something. I think a lot of you talked about listening skills, and I can see it in the chat, listening comes up quite often. It is true that a mentor really needs to listen, but I've said that they need to know themselves because sometimes, and a mentor isn't a coach. A mentoring client, a mentee, would like to get some advice. And Kelly, thank you so much for the great comment there, leaving their ego out of the door or outside of the door. As a mentee, if I am, for instance, asking a mentor to help me, I always come prepared. But also the expectation is that the mentor would like to share their experience, right? So it's listening, but also being there to help the mentee actually have an agenda. Similar to a coach, make sure that the mentee knows what they want to get. And it's important that the mentor knows themselves to be able to ask for that. Now, a practical tip, the third one I wanted to share, simple as it is, and you might find it quite interesting, is to obviously train the mentor and the mentee. And actually, the way I do it is I train them together. You might find it an interesting idea that you would get mentors and mentees in the same training. But I believe it's a great opportunity. Now, what it gives you is the opportunity to build trust. It gives you the opportunity for both mentors and mentees understand what is this relationship supposed to be about. It gives both parties the ability to get to know each other. So, because they're in there together. I think I've seen some studies that when it comes to the skill level of mentors and mentees, and I've often been asked that question, it's actually best if it's not terribly separated by a skill level. So what I mean is, for instance, if a mentee finds themselves, for instance, in sales, and if they would say that their skill level is, 4 out of 10, a mentor would probably be someone that has a 6, maybe a 7, but let's not go too far. I think this is why I advocate a continuous cycle for a mentor and for a mentee to possibly become a mentor a year after they've had the mentoring or still will have as an ongoing relationship. For me, training them together, putting them in the same room, builds, I think, a common ground of understanding. This is what creates this trust about the fact that a mentee knows what is the responsibility of a mentor and also learns what is it that a mentor should ask for. So I love the comment about the different learning styles and personalities. Thank you so much for that. But it also helps to train them together to achieve synchronization based on that. So this is interesting because we've talked about volunteering, and I do believe, obviously, as a mentor, you have a mentee, you get paired. Now there's different ways of doing that, but it's also important to look at the personalities and learning styles. However, I would say sometimes it's worth to have styles that might be a mismatch. You might ask yourself, TK, what are you talking about? Wouldn't that be ineffective? Well, I've often seen this being an incredible opportunity for both parties to grow. You see, I'm talking a lot about first time managers and how important it is for their particular moment in time when they've just been promoted to find a mentor. But to be honest, and this goes back to the second tip, the mentoring process is also a great opportunities for the mentor themselves to grow. Right? It's one of the great motivators that many mentors that I work with quote in terms of the reason why is it that they're doing this particular role. I think the importance here, and especially when you look at like mismatched styles, is for both of them to learn to work together despite their differences. I've seen that being a huge opportunity for growth for quite a few. Yes. Thank you so much, Garu, for your comment there. Just make sure to show up because that actually leads me to my next thought-provoking question for the last tip, the fourth one. How often do you think a mentor and a mentee should meet? What's the best cadence? How should it work? I know it's a tricky question, and you can say it depends, but in your experience, if you have a mentor, how often do you meet with them? Or maybe if you don't, how often do you think it should happen? I'd love to hear your answers. What do we have? Yes, test and learn the approach and find out what works best. Oh, Sergio, lovely to see you. I mean, if you go to my first tip, the cycle or the life cycle of mentoring is also about evolution. Like when I come to an organization, I have my experience, I have these tips and more to share, but I always make sure to know the organization and evolve the program because it will. Nothing stands in place. But I'd love to know your opinion. How often do you meet your mentee? Because when it comes to me, I mostly talk to mine every quarter. I mean, I don't want to give you a consultant answer, which is it depends. It does, but practically, it's important to meet at least once a quarter, right? So the reason for that is, as human beings, we at work, especially managers that are being promoted for the first time for this particular role, there is a lot on our minds, and it's easy to forget. It's easy to get lost in all of it. For a relationship to be fruitful, for it to build trust and evolve over time, mentees and mentors should actually meet. It's interesting because they can use different channels. Interesting, Ivy, you've recommended at least monthly. I would say so too, especially at the start. But if they're not meeting at least once a quarter, something might be happening. It depends on the pace of work of the organization. It depends on, what are the big initiatives that are happening right now? How does a first-time manager, get trained and included into that? But yes, once a month is great. But I find that at least once a quarter is my rule of thumb. So, with that, that's not the tip I had for you. It's just one answer to the question, at least from me. When we talk about the tip, is how do you make them to actually progress? How do you make them to evolve their relationship? How is it that, especially when it's not like a yearly program, but it's an ongoing cycle, which I completely advocate, is the fact that to make it happen yourselves, which is probably the target for this particular advice and this particular slide, you need to nudge them a bit. What do I mean by that? So, for instance, when I talk with many professionals in L&D and in HR, people that organize these kinds of programs, what they do is they often check and control. Nora, bi-weekly, it's a good cadence, definitely, but depends on the pace of work. Some mentors will find it hard to be, but at the start, more frequently. Going back to nudges. What do I mean by that? Well, many program teams prefer to control. Many teams, what they do is they check, oh, how often do you have these sessions, right? Then mandate them to have them at least once every fortnight or once a month. I will give you a tip to do something slightly different, which is to make sure to give people a nudge in a proactive manner. There's two pieces of advice in this one. First of all, if you're a member of a program team that is, helping mentors, my personal advice, depending on the cadence that's usual for your organization, is to make sure that you help your mentees and mentors by nudging them with maybe thought-provoking questions on email or on the chat, on Slack, on Teams, whatever communication platform you use, or intranet, or maybe hot topics. This month we're talking about ESG, or we're talking about the synergy between silos in our organization. This is extremely helpful. And, I have a list for my clients and I always brainstorm these things with my clients, because what happens is both the mentor and mentee, they get this information, and it's such a wonderful prompt to have a meeting. And it's such a wonderful thing to start a conversation with. Now, you've seen quite a few prompts from me today, which is what I'm doing. I'm asking people thought-provoking questions, and if they get such a question, what you get is a conversation. Vanessa, lovely to see you here, V. Allow mentee to set goal for themselves. Absolutely, the mentee should own the relationship. But sometimes, and this is quite topical for this fourth advice, it's difficult for the mentee to know what they don't know, right? I'm not saying that these should be mandatory. I think, however, that giving nudges to your mentors and mentees as thought-provoking questions or hot topics is incredibly helpful, because there's wisdom in that. There's many cards against humanity. I think there's so many games and tools that enable that, but sometimes an email once a month or every fortnight can really do the trick. And there's a second piece of advice on this slide, which is proactive. Right? So proactive nudges can be from the program team, but I think many of you have talked about how this mentoring relationships look like, and if there's a cadence, if especially at the start when you're a first-time manager, you would like to meet them more often than just once a quarter, the mentor will get to know the mentee. But sometimes what happens is, and oftentimes it comes to pass, that a mentee looks at the mentor with reverence. They say, oh, I don't want to bother this person with my mundane problem. They're a, senior leader, or they're quite busy themselves. Maybe I shouldn't necessarily take up their time. And in this particular scenario, which happens quite often, because that's quite normal, right? Especially for first-time managers that are quite early on this journey, a mentor should be proactive. A mentor should be somehow present in the life and work of the mentee, in their management practice, for them to see that there's something that's bothering the mentee. It was quite exciting how, the mentor I started with, the mentor I started talking about, the Air Force General, was able to pick it up just by seeing my posts on LinkedIn. There's something that's shifted. Maybe it's best to have a chat. A good mentor is a proactive one. Because when a mentor knocks and says, hey, I've noticed this and that, this can be incredibly powerful and show to the mentee that they care and open up the right conversation. I think, this is some great advice, and I do hope that when you think about that, these 4 points, which is, A, make sure it's ongoing, discover their why, train them together, and make sure that you nudge proactively, you will succeed. So let me tell you a story about how I have helped a client achieve all that. So They're called the Sporting Solutions. You can see them at a conference. Yes, they're a sports betting company, and I've worked with them as an employee. And then they came to me and got me as a consultant in 2021. And they've asked me to help them with a mentoring program. So, because they were actually growing quite significantly at that time, and they needed help with new managers, right? They expanded over a year with 83 people and promoted quite a few people to be managers. So they needed to do something to help them. Pamela, thank you for your comment about nudging. Yeah, it is really empowering, isn't it? And the way I've helped Sporting Solutions, or the Sporting Group as they are called, is we've started with the first intake of 7 managers, and we got more and more managers every quarter. So what happened is, because it was an ongoing program, it was easy, and this is the first tip, to make sure that no one felt like they missed the boat. This is a huge challenge when it comes to typical like year-long projects, which is like, well, you didn't take this one, maybe you'll have better luck next year. I don't know if many organizations work in this annual cycle like that. It's not productive, and this is an example of an SMB that definitely didn't. Now, what happened is, after the first year, we started taking people biannually. So their growth period did end. Well, they're still growing, but not as fast. They just captured a corner of the market. And what I think was beautiful is they applied all these tips. I was working with them to prepare the training, to help them with the pairing, to actually lead sessions with existing managers to discover their why. And right now, after 4 years, this is an ongoing fixture. There is no mentoring program. Mentoring is just a part of how they do things when it comes to first-time managers. And in fact, they've expanded it to other roles too. Everyone has a mentor. When you join, you get one when it comes to management if you're a first-time manager, but you also get a functional one. Not to mention, obviously, you have a line manager. They managed to succeed because of that, and I think this is something I want to leave you with, which is make it a permanent fixture. Don't just do it one-off. Don't hire an army of consultants to try to, sell you a bunch of PowerPoint slides. Mentoring, especially for first-time managers, is a culture. The same way as good leadership is. In fact, leadership mentoring is a part of leadership. As leaders, if you are one, if you gave the answer a leader, or if you're thinking about one, or becoming one, or you're successful in what you do, which most of you I'm sure are, there were people in your lives that have really made a difference. And I think many of you here, and I see it through the chat, really want to give back. And that's a great opportunity. If you're in a place in an organization to be able to do that, starting a mentoring scheme for first-time managers is definitely a good way for that. Yes, well, I'm looking at the comments about the UK stats. Well, that happens. But just to summarize, because we're slowly getting to the end of this wonderful show, and thank you so much for so many of your great comments. It's just, I'll have to read them all. I can't read them in the moment, but I'll definitely have a look. A quick summary. The 4 tips. Make the mentoring ongoing as a part of your culture. Start with the discovery of why. Why is it mentoring for first-time managers an important activity for your organization? And why, as a mentor, you want to mentor either first-time or up-and-coming managers? That's quite key for them to understand. Train together. You don't have to do it separately. It does create, separation and mistrust. If you do it together, it actually is very doable and incredibly helpful. And finally, proactive nudges, both from the team that, administers and, I'm not saying manages, but leads the initiative or the scheme or the culture, and from the mentors themselves. A good mentor is always proactive. So these 4 things, I'm sure that, many of you will think that, wow, okay, well, I'll be able to apply it. And just to reflect, I've got a bit of a question for you, which is what I would love you to do is in the chat itself, let me know what you're taking away. We've talked about the 4 tips, but think about like, what's your aha moment? What is it that you would like to take away from these 40 something minutes we've spent together and all the wonderful chat messages that were there too as a part of this conversation? And what is it that you're learning? Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I can't remember who is it exactly, but someone mentioned how the word manager gets mentioned, and it's a difficult one for many. But yet, I think this is how the role is called, and you've got leaders, mentors, and coaches. But when you're being promoted to a first-time management role, it's just an important thing to consider that's the call. Thank you so much for your shares. Wow, you're definitely taking away quite a bit. That's amazing. So, oh, by the way, before I move on, there's one more thing. I might not be a Steve Jobs, but I've got my turtleneck. I think Columbo, the detective, is also about one more thing. So, I've got a present for you, a bit of a gift. So, I've captured all these wonderful 4 pieces of advice into an infographic. If you're interested in having one, I don't want to spam you, so just let me know. If you could just like maybe send me a direct message on LinkedIn and let me know that you want one, I'll send it to you so you can use it as a reminder for yourself about these 4 tips. And when you're thinking about putting something in place for the first-time managers, they'll be right there. Just drop me a line on a direct message that you want one, and I'll make sure to pop it over in your inbox. With that, hopefully you had a great time. So I would like to thank all of you for coming in such numbers today. It's been a pleasure having you. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. And I hope I'll meet you again. I'll, as always, make sure that you know about my next webinar. But for now, I wish you all the best for the rest of your afternoon, evening, or day, depending on where you're from. And remember, as a leader, if you're a leader, there were many people that helped you along your life. It's important to give back. And if you're in a position to create an opportunity for people to give back, kudos. See you soon. Bye-bye.